AccuWeather's Ask the Experts. I'm your host, Jeff Cornish. We go beyond the forecast to give you the how and why on all the cool and interesting things that you've wondered about and wanted to ask in weather, space, and science. And today we're going to cover the forecasting process here at AccuWeather. Many of our viewer questions have been interested in delving into how we formulate a forecast for any given place, a given time, or a given medium. So today we're going to pull back the curtain and let you know a little bit more about the process. And joining us is our expert today, Senior Director of Forecast Operations, Dan Depodwin. Dan, thanks so much for being with us here. When I was working in local TV, I had no idea how much of a human touch went into the AccuWeather forecast compared to some of the other national apps out there. So we're glad that you're joining us and interested in talking more about this here today.
Yeah, happy to be here, Jeff.
Well, Dan, we often like to begin some of our questions with those who we work with, all tied to the weather and how you got into the passion of meteorology. So how did that happen for you?
So I think a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people who are in meteorology become interested when they are a young child. In my case, my parents tell a story of me pointing out all the weather vanes in the car. I call them vavas apparently when I was 2 years old. So that was sort of the beginning, I guess. I didn't even know what weather was, but I was interested in something about weather vanes when I was 2. And then from there, it took off with a variety of weather events when I was a kid. I grew up in New Jersey during the 90s, so we had the blizzard of '96 where we had about 30 inches of snow at our house, and then we had a microburst a few years later, and Tropical Storm Bonnie in '98. I was down at the beach in New Jersey, so trying to figure out whether to evacuate the Jersey Shore or not. So that was sort of 3 events in a very short amount of time. Really inspired me to continue that as a passion.
Very good. And I was on the other side of the Delaware River. Also, the superstorm, the blizzard of '96, I should say, brought about 30 inches to my backyard too. So we were in a similar boat there. Influential storm. Some of you remember that as well. And it's safe to say that weather runs in your family, even in your married life. So your wife is a meteorologist who spent a good chunk of time working with us here at AccuWeather. Does weather and topics tied to big storms, does that tend to come up at the dinner table?
Yeah, we love weather, and even though she's not still on the forecasting side of things, her background is in meteorology, and we talk about the weather all the time. I'm actually really glad I'm married to a meteorologist because it makes our conversations even more interesting, I feel like. We just this past weekend had a good thunderstorm in the area, and we drove up to the local church nearby that has a great view and saw the storm come in, and it's pretty special to be able to do that with your spouse. And also you get a chance to talk about what's coming up in the weather and whether it's going to snow, and take some bets sometimes on how much it'll snow or what the weather forecast will be.
I like it, and pretty good stuff. When it comes to forecast operations here at AccuWeather, you help to manage that operation. I don't think many people realize how much of a human touch still goes into what we do here at AccuWeather in an age when a lot of our competition basically has just computer generated forecasts with an icon that's slapped out there with no human intervention. So what's it actually look like? Do you guys say, the end user is looking at maybe a 7-day forecast for New York City? Does somebody sit down and make a 7-day forecast for New York City? Or how does that work?
Yeah, so that's a great question, especially with all the computer technology out there these days. Like, how does a human play a role in the creation of a forecast? And really, I mean, the forecast is always out there, right? Through apps and websites. The forecast is sort of this living, breathing thing that gets updated at any time throughout the day. And so from a forecast standpoint and from a forecasting team here, our expert meteorologists are always looking at, we always sort of ground ourselves in what's happening right now. And if you don't know what's happening currently, it's hard to have a good understanding of what can happen in the future. So we start with what's happening now with satellite, radar, observations from all these different data sets that we look at. And then we look at all the different model guidance. We have over 190 models and different types of data that we look at for what the forecast can be in the future. And then we really combine that. It's not just models, though. We don't just like to use models, but it's how our understanding of those models evolved over time by looking at them, what are their biases. We combine that, the forecast guidance with our expertise. Many of our team has been working for at least several years, if not even several decades. So combining those expertises to issue a forecast or to update a forecast, and that can be anywhere from the next couple hours to making sure it's as accurate as possible, or even to the next several days. And in some cases, our customers on the business side get forecasts out several months.
And I know that the product that you are modifying, obviously pulling away from just a computer-generated product, then populates a lot of things in a very efficient way, all the way down to the weather graphics that we use on the air. So if we're showing a regional 3-day forecast with the next 3 days for all the north central U.S., I'm not physically typing in, or our graphics team's not typing in Omaha's forecast for next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. That automatically populates into our system from your forecast team's work, which is great.
Absolutely.
And there are other things that AccuWeather does to add more value. For example, the old-fashioned wind chill or the heat index. We have a super product called the AccuWeather Real Field Temperature. And what are some of these other things that we do? It might be the local storm max to provide a little more value beyond the typical nuts and bolts of a forecast.
Yeah, the AccuWeather Real Field Temperature is really, to me, the only thing out there that gives the user an appreciation for what it actually feels like, no matter what the season is. It's not just the heat index, it's not just the wind chill, it's a combination of other factors, how sunny it is, whether it's precipitating outside, how high the sun is in the sky as well. So that goes into the AccuWeather Real Field Temperature, and then the AccuWeather Local Storm Max is designed to give an idea of what is the sort of the conceivably highest value from a storm, whether it's a wind speed or a rain amount or a snow amount, trying to give that the idea of like, well, how bad is this storm in one spot, or how much could it produce from a wind or rain standpoint.
Kind of a worst case scenario. Sometimes for a winter storm, it's going to be way up on some high elevation spot in near Snowshoe, West Virginia, or something like that for a mid-Atlantic system. We do have our first viewer question here, which is coming from Kevin in Michigan. And Kevin writes, is there a location or a particular city that's more challenging than others to put together a weather forecast for?
So I think it's generally in places where the terrain is varied. I guess there's a couple things that make it more challenging. One is place, if from a personal standpoint, if you're not as familiar with that area. So familiarity with the area certainly helps. But certainly a place that has complex geography, places that are mountainous regions have pretty complex weather because there's a lot of geography and terrain really impacts whether it's near a coast or not. It really impacts the weather. And also I would say places that don't have a lot of data are also challenging. Either a lack of observations for what it's doing currently, lack of radar. In a lot of parts of the world they don't have good radar data. Or even in places like the west coast of the US or even Alaska, there's a lack of sensing about what's happening over the Pacific Ocean. We know a lot less about what's happening over the Pacific compared to what we do know what's happening over the US. So the west coast can be a bit more challenging too.
Okay. I spend just enough time on the forecast operations floor that sometimes the phone rings or I hear some of you on phone calls with some of our business clients. We work with more than half of the Fortune 500 companies across the country, and in some cases it might be keeping rail interests, trains safe from tornadoes, but sometimes some of the things that we're working with when it comes to other companies are not quite as obvious as just severe weather safety for a moving piece of transportation. So when you are doing some of these consulting conversations with big business companies and business interests, or maybe DOTs or school districts, what kind of decisions are on the line that you're helping them wade through?
Yeah, so that can be a decision to sort of, maybe simple as whether to close school or not. It's a little different now with remote learning days post-COVID, but the schools still care about whether to go remote or have an in-person session, so there is still a decision to be made there. So we work with a lot of school districts along lines of those decisions. We also work, especially in the winter, with departments of transportation about how much snow will fall, but really the important things are the timing of the snow, what type of snow, is it going to be wet or is it going to be dry snow, what will the rate of the snow be. The start and stop time is really important to understand if it will happen during a commute time period. What's the temperature of the road? There's a lot of different parameters that departments of transportation care about. And even outside of the winter, it can be during the spring and summer storm season. For instance, in the Northeast, will trees or leaves clog drains from a flooding standpoint. Flooding can be much worse in the fall if there's a lot of leaves that have clogged storm drains. So those are just some of the things we work with our customers to help them with.
Sure. And then there are some other things that we do with other businesses that are maybe not as immediate, but if there's a big correlation between the need for restaurant staffing on a huge scale and weather, some of those things are just baked into some of these other relationships that we have that may not involve the conversation on the operations floor any given moment.
Sure. I think the range of what we provide is really, from the where minutes matter, from a tornado, flash flood, hail standpoint, all the way toward months or even a year plus in the future of understanding how weather will impact the supply chain or the logistics of a certain company.
Okay. Very good. Very interesting stuff. What are some of the career path options for somebody who wants to be in the weather business?
So I think it's exciting because it's only expanding. When I graduated school, I felt like I only knew about forecasting, broadcasting, working for the government at the National Weather Service, or doing research through academia. But now there's so many private companies who are looking for meteorologists. There's a lot of climate jobs out there, whether it be climate resilience or risk analysis. Emergency management is obviously a growing field, knowing how weather impacts different events and providing support for those events. So there's really just a growing area, especially in the private sector, of careers for meteorologists.
All right. Very fascinating stuff. Dan, we're looking forward to talking to you more about some of these other topics that will come up here in our next block after the break. Also, coming up a little beyond that, we're going to look at 3 amazing women and the popular inventions that they helped create so we can better deal with the worst of the nature. And that's all part of our Weather-Wise segment that will be coming up as well. But after the break, we're going to give you more of a behind-the-scenes look at the forecasting process here at AccuWeather. There you can see our forecast operations floor from the top down. We're going to answer more of your viewer questions with Dan Depodwin when Ask the Experts returns. Well, welcome back to AccuWeather's Ask the Experts. I'm your host, Jeff Cornish, and in this episode, we've been talking about how we prepare forecasts here at AccuWeather with Dan Depodwin, Senior Director of Forecast Operations. And Dan, again, the AccuWeather app, it involves a lot of human intervention with that end product, which, again, is very different from most other apps out there that have a national or international weather footprint. How many meteorologists do we have here at AccuWeather?
Yes, one of the things we're really proud about at AccuWeather is the people behind the forecast and our expert team. We've got 45 operational meteorologists in our State College World headquarters, and we've got another 30 in our Severe Weather Center in Wichita, Kansas. And they both teams focus on sort of slightly different things as their main focus, but they coordinate really well together. So it's about 80 or so operational meteorologists, along with probably 20 or more who are in other parts of the company. So it's about 100 or so meteorologists across the entire company of AccuWeather.
It's been interesting to see where people go. I graduated with one who was an operational forecaster, got into human resources then after a little bit of additional education. And among our on-air team, those of us who you see on the air, we also have studied meteorology and have Bachelor of Science degrees in meteorology as well. And others, friends here at AccuWeather who have done things with map integration and data. Ethan Dockey and many other people have moved on to other things, but they're meteorologists as well, and they use some of that information and knowledge to leverage their other skills outside of forecasting. Now, obviously, we don't always agree on every nuance of a forecast. You mentioned that with even your own wife. So talk about the consensus concept here and how that drives a lot of what we do.
Yeah, so the forecast consensus concept is really, I think, it was sort of pioneered by Dr. Joel Myers, who founded AccuWeather when he was a professor at Penn State, learning how that worked with his students, and the understanding that the best forecast over time is the combination of many different inputs from many people. And that doesn't necessarily mean everyone gets one vote, but it means that you have the input from those people, and then there's different leaders on our shifts who have a certain skill set of either listening ability and forecasting ability and experience to combine those ideas and come up with a decision about, well, what should our forecast be or how should our forecast change. So it's really combining the ideas and how people approach forecasting, which is different by everybody. So it's combining all those together and coming out with a sort of an output that's greater than the sum of its parts, which is really an exciting thing about what we do at AccuWeather and why our forecasts over time are quite accurate and also providing more information than what generally you can find elsewhere.
It's a very data-driven approach, and it's interesting to me, and I've known this for a long time in the weather business, that a really good forecaster will have a difficult time repetitively, consistently outsmarting and outbeating or beating the true consensus forecast among a group of many good forecasters.
Absolutely. I mean, you can really see it in the data. I used to be in the Weather Challenge, which is a collegiate forecasting competition, and it was very unusual for a forecaster over the entire competition to always win. Consensus almost always over the long year of the contest would be the best performing forecast.
And obviously there are going to be moments, especially during a high impact weather event. Maybe it's a tropical system, maybe it's an East Coast winter storm that may go out to sea or may stick a little farther west and bring high impacts to I-95. Are there any particular events that you remember, or specific just types of storms where the debate gets a little feistier out there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people here in our State College office who really are passionate about winter weather, and and that's sort of my passion as well. It's what I grew up
Bernie
living.
Reno's right there with you too. He's got opinions.
Yes, he is, and I think a lot of our team certainly has opinions, and they're passionate, but they're also respectful in how they approach that conversation. And I think the conversations during winter storms really seem to rise to that level. And those are the times we're really trying to differentiate ourselves too. How do we provide information that helps people make a better decision? We try to tell a story, how to, because stories connect with people and people connect with people. So how do we do that in a way that allows people to have to make a better decision by using our information that has either more context or more impacts about the weather that they can anticipate?
It's a passionate crowd. You're not going to find somebody out there just sitting back with their arms crossed saying, I don't care. That's not how we roll here at AccuWeather. There are strong opinions and a lot of passion behind the forecast that we produce to you and produce for you. We do have another viewer question. This one is from Lori in AccuWeather's home state of Pennsylvania. So Lori, what would you like to ask the experts?
Do you have a favorite or least favorite time of the year to put a forecast together?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the person generally. I mean, personally, I love winter weather. And I think snow to me and snowstorms in the Northeast are very interesting. And there's a lot of different factors like where will the rain snow line be? What's the temperature? Will it fall during the nighttime or the daytime? Because that can impact how much snow will accumulate. Will there be ice? Will there be wind? Because a lot of nor'easters produce wind. So that's to me very interesting. I also think the summertime with convection and sort of where the individual thunderstorms will be, or will there be a big complex of thunderstorms? Our modeling and our forecast guidance has come a long way, but still the sort of the small scale weather events like thunderstorms are some of the more difficult ones for our model guidance to get a good handle on. The exact placement of, like, we can know generally, okay, this will be an area of thunderstorms, but exactly where that will be, we still have a long way to go there. So I think summertime convection is another area that's just very fascinating to me.
That's a tricky one from a communication standpoint as well. We know there will be big storms in a regional area, but whether you have that in your backyard or it's 10 miles north, south, west, or east, that makes all the difference to the end user. Briefly, another weather question comes from Joanne in Kentucky. And Joanne writes, was there a weather event as a kid that got you interested in the weather? You mentioned the big storm in '96 and some other events. In adulthood, maybe since we kind of already quasi-answered that one, maybe what's the biggest weather event that you have worked that was the most significant in your career?
Yeah, I think it has to be Sandy, Hurricane Sandy in 2012, and actually personally impacted my family. Where I grew up in New Jersey, my parents lost power for over 2 weeks, and they just had tree damage all over the place. So that, to me, I was pretty early in my career, but it was a very impactful experience and one that I will always remember forecasting and helping people, giving information to people that could help them either save lives or protect property during that really historic storm.
Absolutely. All right, Dan. Well, we talked about the forecast process. Unfortunately, in this process, we have now come to the end of our time to talk, but I'm sure we'll be talking with Dan again in the future. Dan, thanks again so much for joining us here. Dan Depodwin, Senior Director of Forecast Operations here. Next up in WeatherWise, we're going to go from the windshield wiper to the car heater. We'll have the story behind these amazing inventions and the women who helped create them. We'll be right back. Welcome back to AccuWeather's Ask the Experts. It is now time for WeatherWise, and today we have 3 weather inventions, and these were all created by women. First, we can thank Lydia Fairweather, we love the name, when you shovel your driveway. In 1889, she was awarded one of the first patents for a shovel that could scrape and scoop snow. Next, when you're driving in the cold but are warm behind the wheel, we can thank Margaret Wilcox. In 1893, she patented her idea to use the engine's hot air and direct it toward the car's passengers. Pretty smart. While her invention had no way to regulate the air entering the cabin, her idea is still the basis for car heaters even today. And finally, the windshield wiper. In the early 1900s, on a trip to New York City, Mary Anderson watched a streetcar driver struggling to clear rain using his arm to wipe down his windshield. There had to be a better way, so back home in Alabama, she came up with a window clearing device using a single swinging metal arm controlled by a lever inside the car. So sadly, her idea didn't really take off until after her 1903 patent had expired, and the windshield wiper was eventually adapted for automotive use in the 1920s. Thanks so much for joining us here on AccuWeather's Ask the Experts. I'm Jeff Cornish. Don't forget, when you have a question about weather, space, or science, you can write us or send us a video question at asktheexperts@AccuWeather.com. You can also call us at 888-566-6606. Thanks for joining us. Have a great one.